London in 1838 was a city of contrasts. Cobblestone streets and grand buildings stood alongside grimy alleyways and shadowy corners. The fog rolled in thick and heavy, shrouding the city in a ghostly veil. Gas lamps flickered dimly, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. This was a place where the familiar could quickly become the unknown, where the ordinary was often touched by the extraordinary. It was in this atmospheric setting that the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack was born. The people of London were accustomed to tales of ghosts and ghouls, but this was something different. A figure, both human and otherworldly, began to emerge from the mist. He was said to leap impossibly high, disappearing over rooftops in a blink. Whispers of his presence spread like wildfire, feeding the fear and fascination of the city's inhabitants. Spring-Heeled Jack became the embodiment of the unknown. No one knew where he came from or what he wanted. His appearances were erratic, adding to the sense of dread that hung over London like a shroud. Each new sighting brought with it a fresh wave of terror, leaving the city on edge, waiting for the next encounter. The police were baffled, unable to catch this elusive figure. Reports of his exploits filled the newspapers, fueling both public anxiety and curiosity. Who was Spring-Heeled Jack and what did he want? These questions haunted the minds of Londoners, turning the city's foggy nights into a playground of fear and speculation. The first sighting of Spring-Heeled Jack was reported in September 1837. Mary Stevens, a servant girl, was walking to her employer's house through Clapham Common when a strange figure leapt out at her. She described him as having clawed hands and eyes that resembled red balls of fire. He gripped her tightly, kissed her face, and tore at her clothes with his claws. Then, just as suddenly, he let her go and vanished into the darkness with a leap that defied belief. The next day, a similar figure was said to have leapt in front of a carriage, causing the coachman to lose control and crash. Witnesses spoke of the figure's ability to escape by jumping over a 9-foot wall with ease. These early reports set the stage for what would become a series of terrifying encounters with the creature known as Spring-Heeled Jack. As news of these incidents spread, panic began to take hold. People were afraid to walk the streets at night. Parents kept their children indoors, and even the bravest of men were reluctant to venture out after dark. The idea that a supernatural being was roaming the city, preying on the unsuspecting, was too much for many to bear. The newspapers of the time were filled with sensational stories about Spring-Heeled Jack. Some claimed he was a demon sent to punish the wicked. Others believed he was a madman using trickery to terrorize the city. The more the story was told, the more embellished it became. Each new account added to the fear and confusion, making the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack grow ever more sinister. As reports of Spring-Heeled Jack continued to surface, the panic among Londoners grew. By early 1838, the city was gripped by a palpable sense of fear. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every noise in the night carried a hint of danger. It wasn't just the lower classes who were affected, even the wealthy and influential felt the strain. The fear of encountering this spectral figure was universal. One of the most infamous incidents occurred in February 1838, involving a young woman named Jane Alsop. One evening, as Jane was at home, she heard a knock at the door. When she answered, she was confronted by a man claiming to be a police officer. He told her to bring a light, as they had caught Spring-Heeled Jack in the lane. Trusting the man, Jane fetched a candle and followed him outside. As soon as she stepped into the darkness, the man threw off his cloak, revealing a hideous visage. His eyes shone like red fire, and he vomited blue and white flames. He wore a large helmet and tight-fitting white garments. Jane screamed and tried to run, but he caught her, tearing at her clothes with his claws. Her cries for help eventually brought her sisters running, and the attacker fled, leaping over the garden wall in a single bound. This attack was widely reported, adding fuel to the already raging fire of public hysteria. Jane's detailed account gave the newspapers more than enough to sensationalize. The public's imagination ran wild, and sightings of Spring-Heeled Jack were reported almost daily. Each new story was more terrifying than the last, creating an atmosphere of terror that hung over the city like a dark cloud. The authorities were inundated with reports, many of which they could do little to investigate. The sheer volume of sightings made it impossible to discern fact from fiction. The panic was real, and it was spreading. London had never seen anything quite like this before. The fear of Spring-Heeled Jack had taken hold, and there seemed to be no end in sight. The descriptions of Spring-Heeled Jack varied, but certain elements remained consistent. Witnesses often spoke of his strange appearance and supernatural abilities. He was said to have a diabolical face with eyes that glowed like burning coals. His body was usually described as being tall and thin, dressed in tight-fitting clothes. Some accounts mentioned a cloak, while others spoke of a helmet or a strange headgear. One of the most striking features was his ability to spit blue flames. This unusual characteristic was reported by several witnesses, adding a supernatural element to his already terrifying persona. The sight of a man vomiting fire was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine, reinforcing the idea that Spring-Heeled Jack was not of this world. His agility was another defining trait. He could leap great distances, often clearing walls and rooftops with ease. This ability earned him the nickname Spring-Heeled Jack and made him seem almost invincible. No matter how many times he was reported, he always managed to escape, leaving behind only fear and confusion. The combination of these features made Spring-Heeled Jack a figure of dread. He was not just a man. He was a spectre, a phantom that defied explanation. His presence in the city was a constant reminder of the unknown, the idea that something beyond human understanding was at work. Each new sighting added to the myth, making him more than just a criminal or a prankster. Spring-Heeled Jack became a symbol of fear itself, a manifestation of the darkest corners of the human imagination. Theories about Spring-Heeled Jack's identity and motives were as varied as the descriptions of his appearance. Some believed he was a supernatural being, a demon sent to terrorize the city. His ability to spit flames and leap great distances seemed to defy natural laws, lending credence to the idea that he was not of this world. For those who held this belief, no earthly explanation could account for his actions. Others suggested that Spring-Heeled Jack was a madman or a criminal, using elaborate trickery to spread fear. They argued that his abilities could be explained by hidden mechanisms such as springs in his boots or chemical concoctions to produce flames. This theory was more grounded in reality, but it did little to alleviate the fear that gripped the city. Whether man or monster, Spring-Heeled Jack was a force to be reckoned with. Some speculated that he was a member of the aristocracy, using his wealth and resources to create an elaborate hoax. This idea stemmed from the belief that only someone with significant means could afford the equipment and time needed to perpetrate such a campaign of terror. It also played into the public's suspicion of the upper classes, adding a layer of social commentary to the mystery. No theory could fully explain the phenomenon of Spring-Heeled Jack. Each new piece of evidence seemed to raise more questions than answers. The lack of a clear motive only deepened the enigma. Was he driven by a desire to cause chaos, or was there a darker purpose behind his actions? The uncertainty kept the public on edge, fueling the legend and ensuring that Spring-Heeled Jack would remain an enduring mystery. The tales of Spring-Heeled Jack were not confined to the pages of newspapers. Many personal accounts added to the legend, each one more chilling than the last. One such story came from Lucy Scales, a young woman who encountered the phantom in Limehouse. She and her sister were returning home from their brother's house when a figure leapt out from the shadows. Lucy described the figure as tall and gentlemanly in appearance, wearing a large cloak. Without warning, he spewed blue flames into her face, temporarily blinding her and causing her to fall to the ground in convulsions. Her sister screamed for help and the attacker fled. Lucy's experience was widely reported, further cementing Spring-Heeled Jack's reputation as a terror of the night. Another account came from a group of workmen who claimed to have seen Spring-Heeled Jack jumping from rooftop to rooftop in the early hours of the morning. They described him as having bat-like wings and glowing eyes. Despite their attempts to catch him, he always managed to elude capture, leaping away with ease. Their story added to the supernatural aura surrounding him, making him seem even more otherworldish. These personal tales were often shared in taverns and public houses, spreading rapidly through word of mouth. Each retelling added new details, making the stories even more frightening. The fear was not just confined to those who had encountered him, it spread to anyone who heard the tales. The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack became a shared experience, a collective nightmare that haunted the city. The personal accounts also added a human element to the story. They were not just tales of a monster, but stories of real people who had been affected by his presence. This made the fear more tangible, more immediate. It was no longer just a legend. It was a living, breathing part of the city's fabric. The terror of Spring-Heeled Jack was felt by all, regardless of whether they had seen him with their own eyes. The authorities faced a daunting task in their efforts to catch Spring-Heeled Jack. The police were inundated with reports, each one more perplexing than the last. Patrols were increased and officers were instructed to be on high alert. Despite their best efforts, the Phantom continued to elude capture. His ability to disappear into the night, leaping over obstacles with ease, made him almost uncatchable. The press was relentless in their coverage, often criticizing the police for their inability to apprehend the culprit. This added pressure to an already difficult situation. The public demanded action, but the nature of the sightings made it almost impossible to mount a coordinated response. Each encounter was different, each report more sensational than the last. The lack of a clear pattern only added to the confusion. In an attempt to calm the public, the authorities issued statements dismissing the more outlandish claims. They suggested that Spring-Heeled Jack was nothing more than a prankster, using clever tricks to spread fear. This did little to alleviate the panic. For many, the very fact that the authorities could not catch him was proof of his supernatural abilities. The fear of the unknown was stronger than any official reassurances. Despite their struggles, the police did not give up. They continued to investigate every report, no matter how improbable. They interviewed witnesses, followed leads, and patrolled the streets night after night. Their efforts were commendable, but ultimately fruitless. Spring-Heeled Jack remained a step ahead, always just out of reach. The authorities' struggle only added to the legend, making him seem even more invincible. By the end of 1838, the sightings of Spring-Heeled Jack began to diminish. The reports became less frequent, and the panic that had gripped the city started to wane. It was as if the Phantom had decided to move on, leaving behind a city still reeling from his reign of terror. The reasons for his disappearance remain a mystery, adding another layer to the enigma. Some believed that the increased police presence had finally driven him away. Others speculated that he had grown bored and moved on to new hunting grounds. There were even rumors that he had been caught and silenced by the authorities, although no official confirmation was ever given. The lack of a clear resolution only added to the legend, making Spring-Heeled Jack a permanent fixture in the annals of London's folklore. Despite his disappearance, the fear he had instilled lingered. People still spoke of him in hushed tones, sharing their stories and speculations. The newspapers occasionally revived the story, usually around anniversaries of famous sightings. Spring-Heeled Jack had become more than just a figure of fear. He was a part of the city's history, a ghostly reminder of a time when the unknown walked the streets. The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack continued to influence popular culture. Stories of his exploits were told and retold, each version adding new elements to the myth. He appeared in penny dreadfuls and stage plays, ensuring that his legacy would endure. Even as the city moved on, the memory of Spring-Heeled Jack remained, a shadow lurking in the fog. The terror of Spring-Heeled Jack left a lasting mark on London. The fear he had instilled was not easily forgotten. For many, the legend became a symbol of the city's darker side, a reminder of the unknown dangers that could lurk in the shadows. The foggy streets, once merely atmospheric, now held an air of menace. Every dark corner seemed to hide a potential threat, every unexpected noise a sign of his return. The psychological impact was profound. People became more cautious, more aware of their surroundings. The idea that something as seemingly mundane as a walk through the city could turn into an encounter with a supernatural being changed the way people viewed their environment. The fear of Spring-Heeled Jack had made the familiar seem foreign, the safe seemed dangerous. This shift in perception was reflected in the city's culture. The stories and plays about Spring-Heeled Jack were not just entertainment. They were a way for people to process their fear. By turning the Phantom into a character, they could confront the terror he represented. The legend became a way to explore the darker aspects of the human psyche, a means of understanding the fear that had gripped the city. The impact on London's psyche extended beyond the immediate fear. The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack became a part of the city's identity, a symbol of its ability to face and overcome fear. The stories were a reminder of a time when the city had been tested and had come through stronger. The terror of Spring-Heeled Jack had left its mark, but it had also become a testament to London's resilience. The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack has endured for nearly 2 centuries. His story continues to captivate the imagination, a fascinating blend of fear, mystery, and the supernatural. He has become a part of London's folklore, a ghostly figure who still haunts the city's collective memory. The tales of his exploits are still told, each retelling adding to his mystique. In modern times, Spring-Heeled Jack has found a place in popular culture. He appears in books, comics, and films, each new portrayal adding a fresh twist to the legend. His image has become iconic, a symbol of the unknown and the unexplained. The idea of a figure who defies the laws of nature, who can appear and disappear at will, continues to intrigue and terrify. The lasting legacy of Spring-Heeled Jack is a testament to the power of storytelling. His story is a reminder of the human fascination with the unknown, the desire to understand and conquer our fears. He represents the darker side of the imagination, a figure who embodies the things we cannot explain. The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack is not just a tale of terror, it is a reflection of the human experience. As London continues to grow and change, the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack remains a constant. His story is a part of the city's history, a ghostly reminder of a time when fear walked the streets. The terror of Spring-Heeled Jack may have faded, but his legacy lives on. He is a symbol of the unknown, a manifestation of the fears that lie just beneath the surface. The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack will continue to haunt the imagination, a timeless tale of mystery and fear.